Baby seems afraid of babysitter. Hidden camera records shocking scene. Whitney and Chris Mattney had been parents for a short while when they decided to hire a nanny. They never would have guessed what a terrible mistake it was. They decided to hire someone they knew, not knowing that they would betray them. Whitney would end up finding something that would shock the entire world. This will make any mother think twice about hiring a babysitter. Thanks to mother's intuition, Whitney was able to discover the truth, saving her daughter's life. Whitney and Chris welcomed their beautiful baby daughter Railan to the world in 2011. She was healthy and happy, and they couldn't wait to take her home and start a life as a family in Springdale, Arkansas. But a little while after giving birth, Whitney had to return back to law school. She was devastated that she would have to be separated from Railan for a few hours each day. Chris and Whitney knew they had to find a babysitter to watch their little girl while he worked and she attended school. They immediately started looking for the perfect babysitter, but they had no clue that the entire situation would turn into a nightmare. Whitney went through countless amounts of candidates while trying to find the perfect sitter, but eventually, she settled on hiring a familiar face. After posting an ad for the position, one of her high school classmates applied for the job. Melissa Medma was her name, and Whitney agreed to let her meet the family. Whitney still screened people in order to make sure she made the best choice for her daughter. She screened Melissa and felt great about her. She felt like she knew what kind of person she was based on her social media posts. To be extra sure and careful, she even got in touch with Melissa's references. They all had only good things to say about Melissa. Happy and excited, Whitney decided to let Melissa and Railan meet, which would be her final deciding factor. When they finally met, Whitney was ecstatic to see how well Melissa and Railan got along, and they had the best time together. She felt secure with Melissa as the nanny, so she offered Melissa the job. Now that everything was sorted with Railan, Whitney could finally feel excited about classes starting back up. She was nervous to leave Railan alone, but she felt somewhat relieved that she'd already given Melissa everything she needed to take care of her. When Melissa showed up, Chris and Whitney said their goodbyes and left. When they came home, they were happy to see that everything was still okay. They were relieved they had nothing to worry about. Railan seemed perfectly happy, but looks can be deceiving. Later in the night, they started getting their little girl ready for bed, and that was when she started acting different. Whenever Whitney would enter the room, she would start to cry. It looked like she was afraid of her Whitney. Whitney tried to think of every reason under the sun as to why Railan was acting this way, but she had no idea what the problem could be. Maybe she was ill or didn't sleep enough at nap time. She didn't even consider that Melissa could be the problem. Everything was fine when her and Chris got home. She figured Railan was just getting used to being babysat. She decided to forget about it for a while. She had no idea the situation was about to get worse. As the couple still went to class and work every day, Melissa continued to babysit Railan. Whitney noticed that her nap times were getting longer. Sometimes they would be up to 3 hours long, which was unlike Railan. Whitney didn't know what was going on, but she tried to figure it out. She knew what Railan was usually like. This wasn't like her. She decided to take her for a checkup, but the doctor couldn't find anything physically wrong with Railan. She explained their situation to the doctor, and that was when he suggested that Railan could be struggling with separation anxiety. It is common amongst toddlers and children. Signs usually start showing at around 6 months old. This could last until children are well over 2. Some children don't experience it, even if they do scream and cry when their parents leave them alone for the first time. It impacts their sleeping schedule. Whitney accepted this as the answer. Whitney took the doctor's advice to heart and decided that her daughter was just experiencing separation anxiety. Soon after, Railan's behavior changed again. Now Whitney started to believe Melissa had something to do with it. Whitney started to notice that whenever Melissa would arrive, her daughter would run behind her or her husband's legs to hide. Whitney wanted to observe more, so she let a month pass and more red flags were going off. She decided that was enough, and she wanted to get to the bottom of what Melissa was doing to her daughter. Whitney decided to install a nanny cam which would provide visual evidence of the problem. She went out to get a normal clock radio which held a camera inside. The lens was on the side of the radio and she positioned it where it could record everything. Ready to find out the truth, she was ready to leave for school. Melissa arrived as planned and Whitney attended her classes. She wanted to see if her daughter really experiences separation anxiety. What the recording showed to Whitney and Chris when they both got home would make them feel sick to their stomachs. They were horrified by the images captured on camera, and because of this, Railan would not see Melissa again. When Melissa left for the day, Whitney rushed over to the camera. She found that it was in a completely different position than from where she left it. Melissa turns the nanny cam away into the living room. It was facing the wall. Whitney grabbed it anyway, hoping she would find some answers. She got a lot more than she thought she would with the cam. After a few months, Whitney finally got to see what her daughter was going through. On the tapes, it was shown that Melissa was treating Railan like she wasn't even human. The first thing Whitney saw was that Railan was in a device that bounced up and down like a bungee for over 2 hours. The entire time she wasn't giving any food, any drinks, and no attention whatsoever. Was this the same Melissa that had rave reviews about her? Whitney was filled with many emotions. Mad, upset, and shocked, this was not the end of the abuse Railan had been through. Before Melissa turned the nanny cam away, was able to record quite a bit, recording Melissa beating Railan violently. The spanking was meant to make Railan stop crying. The cries eventually went from pain to panic. That wasn't the worst of Whitney's findings. When hitting did not silence Railan, Melissa decided to try another method. She was seen grabbing the child and holding her at waist height, then she held onto Railan and began to shake her in an extremely violent way. Melissa moved her from side to side and in a circle while shaking her. Because of the movements, Railan stopped crying like her babysitter wanted to. Violently shaking a young child or baby is harmful. There's a syndrome called shaken baby syndrome, which is a mortality rate of 38%. This means that children who have been shaken in any kind of violent way could die from these terrible movements. Because of their heads and necks are vulnerable, this can cause death to many young children. Infants and children can also develop a variety of health issues, bleeding around the brain and eyes, hearing loss, increase in seizures, paralysis, and learning and developmental disabilities. It could have easily happened to Railan based on what Whitney found on the nanny cam. Realizing all this, Whitney knew that she had to protect her daughter right away. After witnessing the terrible abuse, Whitney rushed her daughter to the emergency room. When the doctors ran some tests, the results came back good. Railan was a resilient and strong girl with no damage found on her tests. While Whitney was relieved of the good news, another thought came into her mind. She was worried about the psychological effects this could have on her child. Whitney was unable to calm down since she's a first-time mother. Whitney and Chris had to report Melissa to the police. There was no way that she could let Melissa near Railan or any other children again. They drove to the police station and filed a report. With all of the evidence presented to them, the police were ready to take action against this terrible babysitter. The police officers decided to ambush her the next time she went to work at the family's household. This monster of a babysitter showed up the next morning as if nothing had happened. She was in for a rude awakening when the police were waiting for her as soon as she got out of her car. In front of the household, she was arrested. Whitney, who was watching the entire ordeal outside her home, recorded how it went down with her camera. She knew that Melissa would get what she deserved. Since Melissa did not have any previous record, the felony she ended up getting was endangering the welfare of a minor. Receiving this charge meant that Melissa would not get the proper punishment she deserved. She would only serve a maximum of 3 months in jail and be placed on probation for 3 years. The worst part was that after her 3 years of probation was over, her record would be clean. Whitney was furious that someone like Melissa could get away with a terrible crime so easily. The soon-to-be lawyer started researching. She knew that Melissa would do this again in another 3 years if she did not stop her now. First, she wanted everyone to know who Melissa was and what she did to her daughter. She decided to make this story known and what Melissa did to her daughter. The mother decided to contact the media and share the details of the story. When researching, Whitney saw that she can go even further than the media. She had to get to the root of the problem to make sure that Melissa and people like her would never be around children again. Whitney contacted people and got enough support to start campaigns across Arkansas. After getting the awareness of this story she needed, she tried to get people from around the country and world involved. Whitney was inspired by what was happening with the movement that she sent out a bill. When Whitney was interviewed by ABC News, she said, "Arkansas will be the first state to have a registry if it passes. Everybody who's been criminally convicted will be listed out there for everyone to see." After fighting the bill passed, this would cause lots of celebration for Whitney and everyone that believed in her bill. This would mean that Melissa and people like her would never be able to hire as someone's babysitter or nanny again. The proof of her actions would remain on a record forever. Sadly, Melissa refused to comment on this terrible incident despite being asked several times. No one but her will know why she abused Railan the way she did. Even though her motives may remain a secret, her record will follow her around forever, and this gave Whitney comfort. Thankfully, Railan got her smile back and grew up to be a happy and healthy child. Her parents said that she seemed to get over the incident and they couldn't be prouder. This child is one of the few lucky children that was not permanently damaged by the abuse of a monster babysitter. There are many predators still out there yet to take responsibility for their horrible actions. It's easy to think that someone could be the right fit for your family, but you never really know everything about the person. People will only show you their good side during an interview. It's difficult to make the right call because you might see a fake side of them, and it's really up to the parents to stay aware like Whitney did. Having a sitter on hand is a necessity for working families. Sadly, we always hear nightmare stories on the news and social media. Some babysitters ended up killing children. Whitney and Chris never thought they would end up in this situation, but they did. At the end of the day, there was no way for Whitney to know that Melissa was going to hurt her daughter. While you can never predict how a stranger will act around your child, there are ways to screen them that should allow you to get a feeling for them. This includes talking to past clients, reading reviews, using reputable sites, and not using social media. Also, you might want to think about installing cameras in your home like in the living room or kitchen, without telling the babysitter. Perhaps you should also be familiar with the children's behavior before and after meeting the babysitter. Whitney, who's an amazing mother, did most of these things, which helped her save her daughter's life and get her justice.